Neil, thanks so much for joining us today. Excited to have a conversation with you and excited to really just share what the future of AI first technology looks like. So I'd love to just maybe start from the beginning with you. Like, how did you see the opportunity for what you guys are building at Winslow, and what is Winslow doing differently than some of even the more modern HRIS platforms that people might be familiar with?
Thanks very much for having me today. It's fun to talk about this stuff. We started off focusing on a very tactical problem, which is that most HR teams, especially once you get to 200 employees plus, start to spend a lot of their time answering employee questions. A lot of those questions are sort of repetitive and simple. Do we have President's Day off? Obviously, they get to be much more complex and have different shades and nuances. But the technology to help HR teams handle this and scale this is essentially non-existent. It's mostly being put up a SharePoint site and hope people read it, but we all know that nobody reads SharePoint sites. And so we just thought it was a really good entry point for AI technology into the HR department to help with a very tactical problem that would be give an obvious amount of time back. What we sort of learned in the process is that to be good at AI technology in HR, you have to be very good at context. So if living in Colorado, ask the question, and I living in Los Angeles, ask the same question, the answers might be different depending on the policies and procedures of the company or the underlying compliance context, et cetera. And so we spent a lot of time just getting that piece of the puzzle correct. But the thing that we always really wanted to do is we wanted to be able to answer any employee question, sort of like our aspirational goal. And if you think about that, there's a lot of different types of questions. There's sort of practical, like, do we have President's Day off? There's personal, how many PTO days do I have left? And then there's sort of action-based questions where maybe a sort of complex workflow as a result. I want to add a new dependent, or I want to change your bank account information. And what we ran into there is that our ability to communicate with existing HRS providers really hit a wall. So you can get basic information out of almost anybody, Workday, Paylocity, et cetera, but you cannot push information into them, and you cannot get really fine-grained information on customized HRSs. And so we concluded that to really get to the leapfrog change in how people experience HRIS, we were going to have to build something totally from scratch, from the ground up. And that's kind of how we got to the place that we're at now, where we're launching a completely brand new HRIS, payroll, benefits, HRIS, sort of onboarding workflow automation, all AI native, almost more out of necessity because of the understanding of where we wanted to get to than anything.
And when you think about like how different the architecture and the capabilities and the use case of a AI native HCM or HRIS is compared to an HRIS that is dropping AI into an older architecture, like where does that show up? Is it the interoperability with other systems? Is it the extensibility to add functionality? Like, what are some of the differences that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think we'll start to see more and more of people drawing a clear distinction between AI-powered software and AI-native software. Both are great evolutions, but I would say, for example, AI-powered today feels like there's a button somewhere that slides out a window, and there's chat embedded on top of the existing application, and it can do some things and other things it struggles with. So I'll give you an example of where it struggles a bit. So if you, for example, are using like a CRM system and you pop open the AI feature and you ask it to do something quite complex that would involve changing the settings of the CRM system, it will just tell you like where to go, like click on this menu, go to this tab, type in this thing. It's really just reading the documentation about the product and regurgitating its understanding of how you can accomplish that goal. That is kind of the state of the art of AI powered. We think that there's a completely new way of thinking about things called AI native, where the software actually helps you do that thing, not just sort of instructs you from a documentation on how to do it. To get there, you have to rethink a lot of what software is and what that means. The main kind of like leap there is that we think in general of AI as text-based conversations. I type something in, I get a bunch of generative response back, and it's very useful to me. But what we need to do is we need to think of AI as giving you different types of responses that are the most useful to what you're trying to get done. In some instances, like, do I have President's Day off? The answer could just be like, yes, and it's this day. That works great. But if I say, I want to add a new dependent to my healthcare plan, you actually might want something that's a super fine-tuned little bit of application to help you do that. And what we've done in our product and what we think about in terms of AI native, we've actually blended those things together. So when you use an AI native chat product, you kind of move between text-based conversations and actually interacting with live application widgets that are really efficient and well designed for the task. A way to think about it is take any kind of SaaS application, whether it's like a Workday or something like Salesforce, and break it into tiny little bits and pieces. And when that piece is the right answer to your question, just bring that piece into the chat, let someone interact with it, and go back to what they're doing. So you could actually interact with a lot of different parts of a classic SaaS application, all without ever leaving chat. And it's just a completely different experience where the user, the employee primarily, isn't overwhelmed by feeling like they have to learn something. They're 100% focused on just what they're trying to accomplish. And the software itself is smart enough to know if that's best accomplished with a text-based answer or an image or a piece of an application that helps them get something done. I sort of say, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It feels like a lot of software will go this way. And there's a bunch of other stuff around the orbit of that. Like you mentioned, can you use it in ChatGPT? How does it integrate with Slack? Those kinds of things that AI native products are starting to be consistent about. But I think fundamentally, the core thing is, how do I accomplish my goal primarily conversationally without ever having to click on things? I just need to like explain what I want as a kind of high level narrative, if that makes sense.
And so if I have this correctly, the same HRIS application in theory exists in this scenario in an AI native world, as well as in sort of the legacy architecture. And it's still built with all the same components, but the difference is in the past, it had to be essentially fit into a desktop. And so there's a lot of tabs and there's a lot of submenus and things to help you get to where you need to go. But you're saying if you deconstruct all those pieces and all those workflows and all those buttons out and you put them behind the chat screen, then all I need to do is talk to the chat. And sometimes it'll do the action I'm asking it to. Sometimes it'll bring me to the exact screen or widget or workflow that I want to work on. Is that essentially the way to think about this?
Yeah, that's right. And so one of the things that one kind of realizes in this process is we're not like reinventing payroll or benefits. I mean, for the most part, almost every single provider does the same thing, right? They collect information about you, they move money into your bank account, they handle exceptions and things like that. What we're doing is we're rethinking delivery of that and how you as an employee and thus as an HR team that has to make sure their employees are successful is able to like interact with that. There is kind of one caveat to that, which is how we think about the ability to extend the core functionality that we have, which we could talk about a little bit. But a very kind of simple way to think about it is all the same functionality that you have now, but brought to you with a very different interface. Maybe an analogy is, 10 years ago when all of a sudden we moved from our laptop to mobile applications kind of help rethink a little bit how web apps work. Because if you just took like a traditional web app and stick to the mobile phone, it's pretty hard to use a traditional web app. So we got a whole new design and interaction language for how mobile apps work to be able to accomplish many times the same thing, but on a device that looks like this, is held in one hand, maybe you talk to it. So this is like the next evolution of how a software interface works that is fluid between a text-based conversation and some kind of an application running. And like we think of them as quite separate now because that's just how things have evolved over time, but we won't think of them that way in the next 4 or 5 years.
And I want to come back to the extensibility piece, but while we're on this topic of like changing the delivery, you've talked before about an idea of like user gradients and how power users versus passive employee users versus CEOs will interact with an AI native HR system differently. What does that look like?
I mean, I fundamentally believe that AI native software is going to disrupt existing software for all the major categories. So the question, why do it in HR? One of the things that's fascinating to us is that there's not that many applications inside of a company that every single employee has an account on. You've got email, you've got Slack, you've got Zoom. Once you get past the basics, you then get into departmental software, right? So you've got your CRM system or your finance system, or the case may be. But HR, everybody's got an account. And so HR touches all the employees, but those employees don't use the software very often. And so it just struck us as a really, really good place to bring this kind of evolution in play because all of the employees would essentially benefit from it. And so that's kind of one of the things that we just thought was really important and valuable about this was we would be able to positively affect that experience of everybody in the organization.
The way that applications can now work within ChatGPT, how does that
Yeah.
change over the future? Like, does every CEO need to log into HRIS of the future, or can they access the HRIS of the future in other places?
Yeah. So thank you. Sorry, I forgot to answer that part of the question. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, so like I use a CRM system, but I'm not a power user, right? So I do have dashboards and things like that, but I mostly need to go in and find something. I mostly need to go in and find like what deals are in my queue they're going to close this month, whatever the case may be. I have to wade through so much knowledge about that CRM system to create the right report and make sure that I have like the settings correct, that I like included the right stuff, et cetera. I really want to just say, like, what are the deals in the pipeline for this quarter? And you're starting to see these interfaces come into ChatGPT where you can reference your applications and then just say textually what is it that you're trying to get out of them. And they'll go and they'll pull that information through usually an MCP server, which is just an API interface that you provide it and give you that information in ChatGPT. And so what you see is these different gradients or these different strata of user types that are able to get a lot out of the application without having to learn a lot about the application. So a very casual user, like a CEO who wants to go and get data, can just stay inside of their workflow inside of ChatGPT and then just ask an aside and have the data come in there. Or an HR manager might actually want to set up dashboards and reports and things like that because they're a power user of the system. And then as I was talking about, employees are very casual users. And so, you know, frankly, if they never even see a SaaS application ever, we think they'll be very, very happy. I mean, no one wants to use Workday, no offense to Workday, but no one wants to use a complex system. They just have to, and some are more or less painful. That's the beauty of a conversational interface. Conversational interfaces completely flatten and obscure traditional SaaS interfaces. Like you could have the most complicated product in the world, but if you can talk to it instead of click on it, all of a sudden it becomes the easiest product in the world. We just decided to start with the easy button as opposed to the complicated system. I think you'll see this really consistently happen across applications where we will not try to shove every type of user into the same complex system and just like throw them in the deep end and hope that it works. I would say when we talk to HR managers, loosely speaking, they would say the most common problem we have, if you take a look at the amount of time we spend on things, is answering employee questions and sort of doing that. And once you get to be a large organization, probably the second or third most common problem is just retraining people how to use the HRIS platform over and over again. I mean, benefit season is hell for a lot of people, mostly because they're like software educators as opposed and benefits educators at the same time, right? It's not just here's the benefits question, I'm getting the answer. It's like, how do you go do this thing? Where do I go look for this information? And as we all know, as HR managers, humans have a little bit of capacity to try to figure this out. And then they just get lazy and they just email HR at and ask the question. Like, that's what we're trying to prevent, right? So that's where you get all of your time back and you get to go be a strategic HR team because you're not buried in answering basic, how do I click on this thing and get to this thing questions. You're working on strategic things because AI and a better software architecture is handling that for you.
Love it. And if we accept that premise, how do you see that changing the way that HR does work? And also, how does that change the way that HR teams are constructed? Like, are we going to see smaller HR teams with different skill sets? Like, what does that kind of technology change lead to?
I mean, there's actually quite a lot of dimensions to the answer to this question. I'll try to like unpack it just a little bit from my perspective. The first thing is that we think there's a problem with SaaS software in general, where platforms, as they get bigger, they need to, and they also like to build a lot of features. And so if you go implement, pick your poison, you might get device management. And like that device management might be completely unapplicable for you because you have a 20-person team and you know the name of every person, but it's still in the UI, it's still part of the clutter, it's still part of what you paid for many times. So you're kind of buying these sophisticated systems, you're buying everything whether you like it or not. It reminds me of, 10 years after Microsoft Word was built, you would go to Microsoft Word and you're like, there's 700 menu items and I use three of them. Like, what is going on with the software? It's the software bloat that kind of exists over time. So we think that what's going to happen is that people are going to go back to having a fairly simplistic core that's very competent at the basics, payroll, benefits, tracking people, onboarding automation. And then the software is going to allow you to extend it with anything that you need that's additional. So think about how things like work. You kind of get your basics up and running. And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I have this process I need. Like someone's got to request a parking pass, right? So what do you do today? You create a spreadsheet, you stick that spreadsheet maybe on a Notion page somewhere, and you send out that link to that Notion page. And like the minute you've done that, we all know this, like you've started this hellacious process of acquiring HR debt. Because now someone has to remember that Notion page is there, they have to like not orphan it, et cetera. We think that you should have a view that the framework should just be employees are always just asking the AI how to accomplish things. So how do you allow your employees to just say to the AI, I want a parking pass? Well, we have created in our product the ability to extend the capability of our product to be able to answer that question. And so you can create something with we call a vibe coding interface. You can just basically describe the additional functionality that you want our product to have, what data it needs to execute that functionality, what workflow it needs behind the scenes. And then our product becomes extensible that way. You literally can go into our product and say, I want a parking pass, and we will understand that that triggers collecting a certain set of information and kicking off of a workflow. It's a different way of thinking about how to extend the capability of your software in sync with the necessity of your business, as opposed to let me buy everything and maybe I'll grow into it, or let me buy nothing and then I'm constantly building my own external pieces of the puzzle.
We're constantly in our advisory processes with clients trying to do exactly what you're describing, which is size match and scalability, right? I don't want you to have too much systems so that you're overwhelmed by it. I don't want you to have too little so you're doing all these things outside of the system to process. And so, as you're describing, these vendors are trying to build more and more functionality in so the client never has to kind of outgrow their system, which makes sense. That's the incentive. But as you said, now the system's bigger and bigger and bigger, more complicated, more sprawling and more complex. And so it sounds like what you're describing is instead of the vendor having to build a system that can apply to all clients, it's the vendor builds a baseline that applies to all businesses. And then the client takes the individual steps they need with these vibe coding capabilities to build the features, the workflows, and the requirements that they need, rather than the vendor having to necessarily build all of those in, even if it's applied to just 1% of their customer base.
Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, you would see this day in, day out, right? It's sort of like the fundamental thing that you guys are good at is figuring out like the answer to the Goldilocks problem, right? Which is like, which like, is it too big? Is it too small? Which thing do I need? And the problem with that is that there's no correct answer because it might change in 6 months, depending on how you grow up and maybe you have to scale back, et cetera. And so people default to either throwing everything in or going and to be super constrained. The other problem you have is you run into these just really wacky pricing scenarios that happen because of how people's businesses evolve and grow and how these systems are not aligned with them. Outside of the HR space, I can think of, I use a CRM platform that has this insane sort of like costing paywall system because it doesn't know what an average company is going to use. And so like every time you use the software, you try something new, you hit a paywall or you have to upgrade the software. I must have upgraded the software paywall like 6 or 7 times for a
I think
small
I'm on that
company.
same one.
Yeah, we're not going to use any names here, but to me, it is a reflection of the state of software, right? Where like you just as a software creator, you just don't know what your customers need. And so you try to build this accommodating framework and you're just putting complexity after complexity on their plate. One of my favorite stories, and I use this in my demo of a product, is a large venture firm that we were talking to. They use a very household name, large HRIS system. They had 450 employees. And the head of HR for this organization wanted to send this T-shirt to everybody in the company. And so she needed them to go into this large vendor and insert and put their T-shirt size in. It was so complex to explain how to do that to people. She actually created a Loom video, which she sent out to all 450 employees that explained how to go into their HRIS and put their t-shirt size in. That to me is like the definition of where we are in the world, the insanity of where we are in the world. And so in our product, you literally can go in and say, I want my employees to add a t-shirt size. I need to know what location to ship it to and what size they want. Once it's done, submit that to this person and then send them the note saying it's on its way. That's what you type into our product, and it will literally add an extension to our product so that if someone inside a chat says, update my t-shirt size, it knows to kick off that process with that front end, collect the t-shirt size information, off you go. And that t-shirt size information is now available inside of your data model. So if you do reporting on it, you can say, show me everybody who hasn't filled out their t-shirt size yet, grab those email addresses and send them a nudge email. It's just a different way of thinking about growing with your customers.
Yeah, and if I'm someone who doesn't need t-shirt sizes, then that's not in my application, right? Like in the old model, that feature, that workflow is in everyone's system now because we have to kind of one-stop shop it. But now it's just like each organization can decide what features, what data model, what workflows, what permissions they want.
Yeah. So to sort of go back to your previous question about how organizations are changing, I fundamentally believe that you'll see most organizations, not just HR, start to reflect a bit of what I kind of call the triangle, which is you'll see a head of the department, which is obviously like domain knowledgeable, but understands AI enough to understand what's possible and understands the needs of the organization and how that department has to interact with that. Underneath that person, there'll be kind of the how things get done bucket. Right now, that's mostly people, right? You've got your benefit specialists and payroll specialists, et cetera. AI will kind of eat some of that over time, right? You don't need 10 benefit specialists. You might need a couple. And then over here, you have what I call like X ops. So in HR, it would be people ops. But you also have in finance, you have finance ops or you have dev ops or whatever. That role has for a long time been getting good at kind of like mixing people, humans, workflow, and technology into a way to kind of accelerate the organization. I think AI is like the golden moment for XOps, where they can do so much more powerful things. The platforms are so much more powerful that the people ops function will really come to the foreground in a way that it hasn't before and become really the glue of a lot of modern HR departments. So you'll have stewardship from this domain expert. Obviously, like sometimes a human needs to get involved in things. You will have still knowledgeable execution for some period of time, mixture of humans and technology. But then this ops role is going to take all of this new technology and learn how to compose it into things that help the business get stuff done. And that composability is really about what we're talking about here, which is just extend with only what you need, right? Don't fight complexity that was handed to you because you might need something in the future. And it's just a different way of thinking about accommodating customers who evolve.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk through a lot of this with us. Really insightful. Excited to share Winslow, share your guys' upcoming launch and some of the ways that you guys are really pioneering AI native HRS platform. So appreciate the time today, Niel.
Yeah, it's fun. I love talking about this stuff. It's interesting times and we're living in them.